I've just received this book, and I would like to give a few brief comments about the introduction. It's by Slavoj Zizek, the communist Hegelian philosopher, and the introduction says, "One day, or someday, maybe, the century will be Hegelian." Well, I agree with that. And Zizek says that a meaningful and productive question would be, how does our time look in the eyes of Hegel? And the purpose of my channel is to give you an interpretation and trying to answer partly this question. And it says that the claim that the 21st century will be Hegelian cannot appear as anything but madness because of the evolution since the time of Hegel, quantum physics, evolutionary biology, the cognitive sciences, digitalization, global capitalism, and so on and so forth. He also says that to take Hegel as a lens through which one might look at the present is the worst possible choice for a thinker, because Hegel, according to Zizek, is outdated. So choosing Hegel as a means to interpret reality as it is not the best option, according to Zizek. And he proposed that we should take, nonetheless, Hegel not as a conclusion, but as a starting point, and ask ourselves, how can Hegel help us understand the phenomena and the world? Then Zizek talks about his three main influences, Spinoza, Kant, and Hegel. Spinoza was a ontological realist. For him, there was only the substance, and we were modes of the one substance. And for Kant, the truth was transcendental idealism, namely that the things that we experience were mediated by the transcendental categories and logic and aesthetic, the transcendental logic and aesthetic of our mind conditioned our experience of the world. And for Hegel, both the mind, what could be called the transcendental ego, and the substance are in a reciprocal dialectical interaction. So the truth is neither the objective nor the subjective, but the dialectical interaction between both. And then he says that the totality, for Hegel, the totality includes within itself many inconsistencies, but for Hegel, the whole contains within itself all contradictions as aufgehoben, as sublated, preserved but transcended. And it is through this Aufhebung, this negation and preservation of contradictions and opposition, that the mind elevates itself to ever higher forms of consciousness and end up being the consciousness of the whole thinking itself. And then, he says that the inconsistencies are ultimately sublated, which is probably the English word for aufgehoben, in a larger totality of rational self-development. The antagonism and contradictions are reduced to subordinated moments of the one. That's what he says, that's Hegel. And then he talks about traditional wisdom, Hindu or Buddhist or Asian wisdom, or even pagan religion in Europe, which says that life is a circular movement within which everything flows and becomes, and things return to nothingness and come out of nothingness. He mentions this, and I made a video about it on the channel Eternal Light. You can find a link down below. And then he talks about the order of being as constitutively pulverized pulverized and disturbed from within. And he mentions Freud, the psychoanalyst, what Freud called the death drive, the disruptive force of non-being in the heart of being. This is what Hegel calls the negative. And being itself is a dialectical process, and dialectics is the movement of the negative. Being negates itself through its own inner negativity, and that's the reason why, although all is one, things are nonetheless many, because the one negates itself as one and makes himself or itself many, and that's explained in Hegel's logic. So this death drive is the negative within the dialectical movement. Yeah. And then he says that a project who would like to impose a universal project which would unite all culture has to appear as an oppressive imposition, because then he mentions that the fact that the multiplicity of languages presupposes the failure of the one language, but the one language at the root of all other language is logic, because whenever we speak in whatever tongue or language we speak, we express logical categories, and logic, Hegelian logic, is the universal language of mankind. And I am trying my best to promote Hegelian logic so that all men will understand themselves as being moments of this logical totality. And he says that all essential and great things can only emerge from our having a homeland, from being rooted in a tradition. The homeland, the fundamental home of man is God, and the unity with God has been lost through this negative process of dialectics, and it must be restored. And the unity of man with God must be restored in the intellectual realm by understanding God. This is what Spinoza calls amor intellectualis Dei, the intellectual love of God, by understanding God. And I am trying my best to make my vision of God intelligible to as many as possible. And then he says that we are all Jews, because the Jews in the imagination of people are the people of separation, isolation, and this is the negative in Hegel's term. And since we're all, me especially, separated from God, we are all the negative of God. And in a sense, yes, we are all Jews in a sense. And then he says that identity for Hegel is the assertion of radical self-difference, for Hegel, identity is the unity of the one, the identity of the one is a form of self-differentiation. For Hegel, the absolute is identity of identity and difference. So the absolute identity presupposes interior self-differentiation with the self, and through this differentiation, identity must be re-established through cognitive understanding, and this is infinity or our absolute relation to self. The unity of the one is not permanently threatened by cracks and inconsistencies. The unity of the one is the crack as such. This is why Hegel's philosophy is the philosophy of negation, is because the one, or being, or anything that exists, negates itself, and this is the movement of all life, and that which produces the becoming of all things. Yeah, and then he mentions probably a leftist activist who drove migrants on a boat to help them arrive at sea in Europe, whatever. And she said, freedom of movement and residence for all, housing for all. Actually, And then he goes on to say this is an abstract vision because it abstracts from the social totality, because you have to consider an entire society and not just the suffering of these persons. And the negation of this abstract, lovable leftist idea that we should all be free to move and to settle wherever we want. The negation of that is the right-wing idea that we should exclude migrants. We are Europeans, we are whites, whatever, we don't want migrants, whatever. And this negation, the right reacts against the left. The left is abstract, the right negates the left, and both in their abstraction and negation are negative, and the true unity is beyond left and right, is to understand the totality of being, to understand why there are migrants, and only God can produce a speech which explains why the world is as it is, and this is this intellectual explanation which brings forth the concrete unity of abstract and negation and makes it a concrete universal, and that's the truth beyond left and right about the question. Yeah, it's maybe a little abstract, but and then he talks about the singularity, and he says that the singularity refers to the idea that by way of directly sharing my thoughts and experiences with others, a domain of global shared mental experience will emerge, which will function as a new form of divinity, actually a very old form of divinity. My thoughts will be directly immersed in a global thought of the universe itself. That's panpsychism, that's cosmotheism, and that's just Hegel's philosophy. So what I'm trying to do from my point of view is to bring about, to the extent that my limited capabilities as an empirical self allow me to do, to share my thoughts, to help promote this singularity, and to help people understand that the singularity is not a post-Hegelian development. It is the very development of Hegel's philosophy, and that's the whole purpose of this channel. So I will keep reading the book, and